Why haven't you guys killed yourselves yet? Go.
I'm really self-destructive, and if I die, I cannot self-destruct.
That's a good answer.
Death drive maxing.
Yes.
Death drive maxing.
Seriously.
Drive is when you undergo the transition from being towards death towards being dead in life.
Check it out.
This, my friend, is hell.
I can't wait to see the look on your face when those zombies eat you.
And there is no more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
Dude, it snatches all day.
It's hard to state the origins of survival horror, but it is undeniable that the genre became immensely more popular with the release of Resident Evil in 1996. It ushered in this sea change. It wasn't isometric, and it wasn't exactly third person over the shoulder. Rather, it was a third-person fixed camera perspective that allowed for a more cinematic presentation to gameplay that really couldn't be done prior to the PlayStation 1 hardware. Unless we're talking about PCs, which, Alone in the Dark tried in the early 90s. Resident Evil allowed for branching paths, and oftentimes you could make a wrong choice. Go down the wrong corridor, and you could potentially be penalized for encountering a group of zombies instead of precious handgun ammo. Careful inventory management was required in order to beat the game. Item scarcity and inventory management were the primary gameplay indicators of the classic survival horror genre. Original Resident Evil, and by this I mean the classic trilogy of the 90s and like Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0, you could include in those too. It was a form of adventure game that required a lot of exploration and memorization, map memorization. I think Dark Souls, the Souls games, take a lot of creative and gameplay inspiration from like the classic Resident Evil game design, where you are initially thrown into this world. In the first game, it was the Spencer Mansion, and you have access to all of these rooms, and a lot of them are locked, and you have to find keys and items and solve puzzles in order to unlock doors, but also more importantly, shortcuts. So as you become more familiar with the sense of place, for example, in the mansion in the original Resident Evil, you eventually get to a point where you can unlock shortcuts that then kind of like scintillate the mind, and now you can get places quicker, and it kind of creates this very satisfying gameplay loop where you feel like you're really getting better in the game, and the only way to get better at the game is through repetition, even though initially you might feel very overwhelmed. Now, in Resident Evil 2, they expanded on this by having 2 separate playthroughs. You could play as either Leon Kennedy or Claire Redfield. The interesting thing about Claire Redfield is the first time in Resident Evil a playable character wasn't a cop. Claire was Chris Redfield's brother from the first game. Gameplay-wise, Resident Evil 2 isn't doing anything that different from Resident Evil 1. It's just bigger. It takes place like kind of... It goes beyond the outskirts of Raccoon City and confining it strictly to a mansion. And now we have this giant police department, but also we have outside instances where there's like sometimes 6 to 7 zombies on screen, which is incredibly impressive for a 1998 PlayStation 1 game. And very innovative things like the zap system, where, so for example, there's a part where you reach the basement of the precinct. either as Claire or Leon, and you come across a weapons locker room, which is completely optional, and it carries 2 items. One is a submachine gun that takes up 2 inventory slots. You have 8 at this point. Or you can take a hip pouch that gives you 2 additional slots. Now, if you're playing the A game, you can choose to take both of them, the submachine gun that takes up 2 spaces in your inventory, and you could take the hip pouch, which kind of like negates the limited inventory. But the problem is, if you do the B playthrough as either Claire or Leon, whoever took all that shit in the A playthrough will not have access to it in the B playthrough. So it created these interesting scenarios that, I mean, for 1998, it was really impressive, and the game doesn't go like that far with it, but that was what Resident Evil 2 brought to the table, and it's the most critically acclaimed of the original trilogy. But a lot of people will say now, and I don't entirely feel this way, but Resident Evil 3 Nemesis released a year later. In the original discourse around this game was that it was too much like Resident Evil 2 because it still takes place in Raccoon City, even though it's mostly outside now. So that's Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3 has 2 main gimmicks, I would say. The one that is less talked about is that the fact that it's the first game in the series that takes place mostly outside. It does have interiors like the hospital and mainly just the hospital, and you do return to the police station, but you're spending most of your time outside in Raccoon City. The other main gimmick is the Nemesis. Resident Evil 3 was about how do I evade this Nemesis who was always stalking me, and it provided these kind of choose your adventure this or that scenarios where you were offered a binary of, so for example, the first time you encounter Nemesis is when Jill is about to head into the police station. You can either choose to take Nemesis head on, or you can run away and go into the police station. But if you choose to run away, you miss access to parts to a special weapon that the only way you can acquire it is to temporarily defeat Nemesis. And then the year after that, Resident Evil Code Veronica, which technically isn't part 4 or a sequel, it was kind of like its own spin-off game, even though it starred both Chris Redfield and Claire Redfield. For the first time in the series, the siblings were the stars, and this game initially only released on Dreamcast, and it reviewed very well, but it did not sell very well because the Dreamcast did not sell very well in North America. And this is where we start to see the limitations to what the survival horror genre was bringing by the year 2000, and how other types of genres are beginning to supersede survival horror. I did a video on Resident Evil Code Veronica. It's not great. I wouldn't recommend it. The thumbnail looks like it was made by somebody who is experimenting with meth. So by 2005, we get Resident Evil 4, which is a total sea change, again, in survival horror. And now we're going to something a little more survival action. Resident Evil 4 starred Leon Kennedy as the only main character in the game, like Resident Evil 3, but he's no longer this kind of naive, shy rookie cop. He is now a full-blown professional. He's very alpha male. He's very bro. So the whole plot of the game is he has to rescue the president's daughter. So you have this void in demand for survival horror content. And Dead Rising in 2006 offered a kind of return to the old school Resident Evil flavor that had been abandoned by Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5 and especially Resident Evil 6, which became much less about item and inventory management and much more about customizing your guns and just making the whole story a little more like anime, which I don't have a problem with anime, just to be clear, but it was clearly Resident Evil 4 and beyond. Capcom were marketing the series, the franchise, as something that it no longer used to be. So Dead Rising comes along in 2006. First of all, Dead Rising is an Xbox 360 exclusive, which is crazy because the original 3 Resident Evils were all released exclusively for the PlayStation 1. And then Resident Evil slowly started dipping its toes in other waters, whereas by 2000, Resident Evil Code Veronica is a Dreamcast exclusive. It would get ported over to the PlayStation 2, I believe, in late 2001. But then by the early 2000s, Capcom had exclusivity rights with GameCube. So GameCube got the rights to Resident Evil for a very short time, but they did. In 2002, the Resident Evil 1 remake, which is a very acclaimed game in the series and improves on the original Resident Evil in a number of ways, was a GameCube-only game. And then, of course, 2005 Resident Evil 4 is a GameCube exclusive, but very shortly. Dead Rising, you could only play Dead Rising on Xbox 360 for a long time. The original pitch for Dead Rising was going to be a sequel to this game called Shadow of Rome, which was like this really interesting like action adventure game like regarding the Roman Empire and like the assassination of Julius Caesar. Really interesting concept. I never played the game, but I remember it getting like pretty decent reviews, but not like selling well when it came out. Because it underperformed, Capcom decided, okay, we're going to make something else. And this is what led to Dead Rising. Capcom, in regards to like Japanese Capcom, there was only one Dead Rising that was developed by the Japanese sector of Capcom. By 2010, which was the release of Dead Rising 2, Capcom had a branch in Vancouver that was called Capcom Vancouver. Then those developers took over, saw development and production over the franchise. So, and Dead Rising 2, I remember being like really good and critically acclaimed. I wouldn't say it's as good as the first game, but I also haven't played it in a while, so I don't know, the jury might be out on that one. But then like Dead Rising 3 and 4, which are both games that I haven't touched, but I've seen gameplay of, and they are not praised. They are pretty like mediocre, they're pretty mid games. But Capcom Vancouver developed Dead Rising 2, 3, and 4. And by Dead Rising 4, they bring Frank West back. It doesn't take place in a mall. It like has to do with like Christmas consumerism and all this shit. But like they got rid of the 72-hour loop, and Frank West is now less of like a goofy everyman and more like just some like middle-aged dope who makes really cringy things that like a toxic man would say. So yeah, like Dead Rising really got away from its roots.
Dead Rising 1, 2, 3, just 3, all of them, 1. Like, is there one you kind of want to, of the 3 games, is there one in particular you want to kind of point the team to with it?
I think we were really looking at our roots and going back to 1, but
That's the correct answer, by the way.
Oh,
yes.
Great.
Why are you kicking me?
God, like I just remember wishing Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 had more zombies outside. And Dead Rising kind of like widens the scope to an absolutely ridiculous degree. And I think a really cool thing that Dead Rising does that Resident Evil wasn't capable of in its early survival horror form was completely expand the inventory and make it more real time. A lot of people like to cite games like Dead Space as being like the first instances of like real time resource management being in a survival horror game. But Dead Rising was doing this all the way back in 2006. And when you level up Frank, your inventory expands. Like I was saying about Resident Evil 2, where you find the hip pouch and you get an additional 2 slots. When you level up as Frank, there will be occasional times when he'll gain a new inventory space. So the game requires you to balance, okay, how many guns do I want to bring? How many melee weapons do I want to bring? But also, how many health items do I want to bring? Or novelty items like putting construction cones on zombies or splattering ketchup all over them, all the way down to books that Frank can find that will then give him stat enhancements. So you're balancing this all in real time, and it's incredibly satisfying. At first, it's like really confusing because especially in the 2006 version, because you're kind of just all over the place trying to figure out like what button maps to what. But once you figure it out and you get the hang of it, like you don't really want to go back. And the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes would integrate more hip pouches into the game. So now you were accumulating inventory over time. So the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes have kind of taken from 2006 Dead Rising in that sense. Dead Rising would take survival horror back to its Resident Evil roots, but now we're transplanted into this massive mall. And the main character, Frank West, is not a cop. He's a photographer / journalist who decides to embark on this like weirdly heroic journalistic quest to go to this mall in Willamette, Colorado, which is overrun with zombie outbreak. And he is going to take pictures while there, save as many people as he can, but also uncover the scoop of what is happening to this town. Like in 2006, this game was this was the first game that really felt like a next generation game in regards to like the Xbox 360 and the next generation being here. Like, it was insanely impressive what this game was able to accomplish, even though the original 2006 version of Dead Rising is very cruel in its on-ramp of how difficult it is with just escorting survivors. So that's one of the things that the remaster I really appreciate, is it makes the survivor AI much more competent, where now you don't have to spend so much time like plowing out zombies to carve a path. I understand why that would why people would like that in 2006, but like I said, I'm older now and I don't have as much time to like beat my head around a video game for a month. So I was on a tight schedule with this video and I had to resort to the remaster, and I'm glad I did. Like, the entire premise of Dead Rising, it's very interesting because Capcom has once again taken from Resident Evil, and Resident Evil 1 in particular. There's a kind of like side questy type of thing you have to do in the original Resident Evil, where you have to, one of your teammates gets snake bitten. You have to do a timed mission where you have to run to like the other side of the mansion, and that with serum, and then you have to run back. And there's like, I can't remember the exact how many minutes it takes. I think it's like 4 real-time minutes, but you have that amount of time to like run and get the serum and then come back. And the game kind of forces you to learn how to play with the shortcuts by then. This is Dead Rising, but it's 72 hours, which amounts to like 6 to 7, maybe 8 hours of like real-time gameplay. So you can go through the game. You don't have to uncover all the scoops. You have to rescue all the survivors. As long as you can just like survive the 72 hours, you can like beat the game, even though you're not going to get like anywhere near the best ending. So like in this sense, like Dead Rising is kind of like one of the first roguelikes, because like it's not like you die and you have to start over, but in the sense that like you're replaying the 72-hour loop and you're getting better and you're leveling up and you're just starting over more and more powerful. Like, you can quit a game like halfway through, like say you fuck up a scoop or something, or you miss it, or you're trying to do the perfect run and you miss a survivor. You can start over at your current level, and the level goes up to like 50. The reason I bring up Resident Evil is not only because Dead Rising was a survival horror game developed by Capcom, but also because all of these games I just mentioned are all games I've had an encounter with. Now, what the fuck is an encounter? What kind of like philosophical ivory tower term is that? I define it as, I'm just going to say Deleuze is a guy with a lot of interesting concepts, and this is one he doesn't really talk about that often, but when he does, I find it very interesting. An encounter is not something that happens between two people in the sense that he uses it. An encounter is something that happens between like a human subject, a thinking subject, and a work of art. And yes, I'm going to qualify video games here as a form of art. If you disagree, goodbye. You don't need to watch this video. Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and even Code Veronica and Resident Evil 4 are all games I will say I've had some kind of encounter with. So an encounter, it's how I define it, is it's a mystical process that happens, but it's basically any game that has so obsessively captured your mind that is it good or is it bad doesn't really enter into it as much as, is this game doing something interesting that I may have never experienced before? And it can become an obsession with the object, a delirium that'll make you manic with joy, but also but it can also be like frustration sublimated into enjoyment. Like if you're stuck on a Dark Souls boss for 2 hours or overnight and you need to like get up in the morning to go to work or go to school or whatever, you're choosing to continue playing that game and bang your head against the wall of defeating this boss at the cost of like your sleep or your health or whatever. It's a sort of delirium. and you derive this kind of like jouissance from the repeated pain of dying. Like jouissance is like this French hoity-toity term for being like really like gaining pleasure out of pain. Basically, it's very sadomasochistic. It could be your very own failure too, though, and this is where this is where desire and drive enter. I'll be honest, before I started making this video, I had not had an encounter with Dead Rising. I originally played Dead Rising in 2007, a year after it released, when I got my Xbox 360 in college.
That's right. Did you know that I have never beaten the 2006 edition of Dead Rising? That's right. I'm a simp. I'm a fake gamer. I'm a big phony. I gave up after trying to play it one time in 2007 because I had just gotten dumped by my girlfriend of over a year, and I couldn't do anything but just mindlessly surf the internet. I wasn't touching grass, but I didn't have time to play BioShock or Mass Effect. I didn't have time to murk fools or teabag them in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Hell, I couldn't even bring up OG footage of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 for this video because I don't have a PC and I can't afford a PC because GOG.com only supplies the Resident Evil Classic Trilogy for PC gamers. I'm a phony.
There's two main types of missions in Dead Rising, I would say. The survivor escort missions and the psychopath boss battles. The survivor missions are a pain if you're playing the 2006 version. If you're playing the 2024 remaster, they are much more friendly. And so, for example, there are multiple points where you're going to have to rescue either a needy or an injured survivor. And this game is like also kind of weirdly sexist, where like you can't give women certain guns, and the vast majority of like the women in the game require like some kind of like, you either have to like hold their hand or you have to carry them. Not always, but the game like encourages you to do this. And I remember, so for the Tanya and I'm sorry, I cannot remember her boyfriend. He's like, he cannot feel anything from the waist down. And this is like one of the best survivor side missions in the game. It's this black couple who's holed out in like this like sports clothing area. And you have to practically like, I mean, there's some problems with it. Like the woman's like a little too hysteric and just like, I'm freaking out, which is just kind of like, is that how she would really act? And the dude is just like, he's like, can you hand me a gun so I can finish the job? So the remaster, this is one thing where I'll give the 2006 version. If you hand him a gun in the 2006 version, he will kill himself. They get rid of that in 2024, which I think is kind of lame. I think that's a really like incredible piece of like storytelling. So what you have to do is you have to carry him on your back, but then you can't give her Tanya like any kind of, you can give her melee weapons, but you can't give her like a shotgun, or you can give her like a submachine gun or a pistol, like a single-handed weapon, but she can't handle a double-handed shotgun. So I give her one of the mini chainsaws that you get from the clown psychopath. And it's just a really good mission. There's another one where we have to save this guy. I can't remember. Like, it's so hard keeping them together. I think it might be Richard. If he's not, I apologize. But he's like in the North Plaza where like the hunting shack is in the supermarket. And he's kind of like holed up in this like area that's kind of off the beaten path. And you have to like go around the other side to get to him because you can see him from the waypoint marker, but he's like caged off. And you get into like the little like nook where he's hiding, and he's like absolutely terrified and overwhelmed. And you see like these nooses hung up on like on the ceiling. It's very very unsettling. But then you get him back. And then another one that I really like is, I think it's Shinji, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but it's these two Japanese tourists who are in this mall in the United States, and they're like yelling at each other in Japanese about like, I can't believe you brought me here. This is the worst vacation ever. Like, I hate this stupid country. And now we're gonna die. And like the guy named Shinji, like that's obviously a reference to Shinji Mikami, father of Resident Evil, even though like Shinji Mikami did not have any like his fingerprints are not on this game at all, despite it being a Capcom game. I think he wasn't out of Capcom by 2006. I think he was like directing God Hand. But yeah, you have to like, Frank has to, you meet him in a bookstore, and you have to find this book in the bookstore that's a Japanese book. So you can learn very quickly like rudimentary Japanese phrases, so you can like escort them back. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff. Sometimes you'll be escorting survivors and you'll stumble across a psychopath boss battle, which I wouldn't recommend if you can avoid it. But when you have to do this, like you have to literally fight a boss battle while you have your survivors like in the area. It's, like I said, not recommended if you can avoid it. These boss battles like remind me of Metal Gear Solid for some reason. I think it's because like after you like they come at you all crazy, and they're like these people who like the system has failed, and they're very like aggressive, and they're ready to just kill you, no questions asked, and you have to kill them. And then after you kill them, you get this cutscene where like a lot of the time they confess, like you're witness to this confessional. Very Metal Gear Solid. So there's the Hatchet Man, which in the 2006 version, after you beat the Hatchet Man, he's just this guy, this like big American type dude, all American, going around with a massive hatchet trying to kill you. He calls you like a filthy communist. They get rid of that in the 2024 remaster. Another like maybe win for the 2006 version. Now he just calls you like a filthy animal. And then you come to find out like he lost his child, and he's just going through it as an American. Then there's Steven, the customer service manager of the Sion's grocery store. I lied. Like I said, a lot of the psychopaths end up having like a change of heart and redeem themselves after they die, and then they confess whatever they're going through with you. Like that only really happens with the Hatchet Man. A lot of these guys just are insane and don't come back from that. Like Steven, he's like, clean up on register 6 or aisle 6, and he dies. And then there's Adam the Clown, who dies after he falls on both of his chainsaws in absolutely gruesome fashion. And the cop too. The cop just kind of blows herself up, like her cardio is just done, and you've outlasted her, and she just kind of like collapses and dies. So yeah, the psychopaths don't have like, they're not the most interesting boss fights, but they do add like another element that's different enough from like the survivor missions that gives the gameplay some good variety. But of course, there are the 3 convicts. Those fuckers. Very early on in the game, you discover this beautiful park outside, which has a lot of zombie clusters, but they're pretty easy to navigate across. Like, oh, okay, this is like, I can get through to other parts of the mall here. Until, I think it's at the first night, these 3 convicts show up and brutally murder a man, and his wife or girlfriend or whoever is just kind of like now left alone, and she's one of the survivors you can collect. The convicts have kind of become infamous. Like, it's not technically a boss battle, and even if you do kill all 3 of them, they will respawn each day. So is it even really worth it to kill them? I did choose to kill them once though, and it was immensely satisfying. A recurring complaint I was seeing in the reviews of the 2024 remaster is that a lot of people didn't like that the mall wasn't lit at night. Which I kind of take exception to, because like if a mall is on a cycle where it automatically turns off during the nighttime just because there's nobody there, I mean, that's the way it would work. And this amplifies the creepiness too. Like, you just gotta decide, okay, when do I want to shop? Should I shop around and like do all the fun cosmetic stuff during the day? Because the game gets harder at night. The zombies become more aggressive, which is kind of a nod to like what could be argued to be the first survival horror game, which is Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest from the late 1980s, which was the first game to transition from day into night and making the creatures at night much more difficult to combat. Creator of Dead Rising, Keiji Inafune, says that the scariest thing in the game aren't the zombies, but the people who have free will and freedom. When I was originally thinking about making this video, I was thinking of tying in Slavoj Žižek, who's like the master of like the death drive theory. He has an interesting interpretation of freedom and how like freedom isn't what we think it is, where it's like everything is available to us. It is actually quite limited. And he gives the example of somebody who, like a pedestrian who's on the street just walking and minding their own business, and then they witness a car accident. They come to save them, and then afterwards like a news reporter, like a news crew comes and they interview the man who is Slavoj Žižek in this instance, and they ask, why did you stop and help when nobody else would? And he said, because I had no other choice. That is Slavoj Žižek's definition of freedom. And it's weird that he like uses that. And I'll use this as like my own personal example. When I was working my soul crushing retail job, I was on a break, and I had this routine of I would go on break, I would go outside completely away from the building I was working at to my car and smoke. Well, there just so happened to be an accident at the intersection I had to cross to get to my car. And I'm ashamed to admit this. I think about it often to this day. I did not stop and see if they were okay. Everybody turned out to be okay. The police came and all this. And I remember one of my associates, when he saw me come back, goes, didn't stop and help, huh? Which made me feel like absolute shit. I was going to use this in regards to like the survivors and how Frank West, even though he's been depicted over the years as like this kind of like goofy everyman who's not like supposed to be virtuous and moral, the best ending of the game requires you to play Frank as if he is the most virtuous, moral person alive, because he's a superhero if he saves 49 survivors, which the perfect run requires you to do. And the achievement for rescuing all the survivors is quite literally called being a saint. Dead Rising 2006 and Dead Rising 2024, aside from one being easier and more accessible than the other, there's very little like difference. But what's interesting is Dawn of the Dead was a zombie movie that released in 1978 by George Romero that was the sequel to Night of the Living Dead. And George Romero wanted to make this movie because he was tired of being kind of typecast as a horror director. So he made this movie about a more like much more overtly goofy movie, but also like a biting satire on like consumerism, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you've heard the story, where it's 4 survivors who hole up in this mall in Milwaukee. I don't know the characters' names, and this is going to sound a little reductive, but I have to categorize them as such. So if this offends you, I'm sorry. There's 2 soldiers, or basically cops, who are kind of like sent in to eliminate this. Initially, it's not a zombie outbreak they're looking to kill. They're going into housing projects and murdering Black and Hispanic people because this low-income housing building is refusing to like give up their dead. Because like when people die in the 78 version of Dawn of the Dead, they come back to life as zombies, regardless of whether they were bitten or they were shot or whatever. There's a Black dude played by Ken Foree who's like the kind of like the centrist of the group. He doesn't have politics. And then the other cop, the white blonde cop, is like this caricature of like American exceptionalism. Definitely would not be surprised if a guy like this would vote for Trump nowadays. But in the 80s, when this movie was being portrayed, he probably absolutely would have voted for Ronald Reagan. And then the other 2 characters are a couple who aren't married, but the woman is expecting. She's a pregnant woman. And the other guy, he's like a news traffic reporter who also knows how to fly a helicopter. So he's called Flyboy by the rest of the cast. He's this kind of like white liberal. So the Black centrist cop offers to perform an abortion to the pregnant lady, which she refuses. She wants to keep the baby. And this is kind of like a subplot throughout the entire movie. But again, he's not a leftist because he's willing to give an abortion. He's only willing to give an abortion because he's like, he knows how to do it. He kind of has this like centrist mercenary. I'll do the job for the right amount of money. Like that's his identity. The American exceptionalist, he ends up dying first because he's very reckless and he's very like arrogant. and gets himself into these ridiculous situations where he's overwhelmed by like 100 zombies and he's trying to like taunt with them, and then they're slow in 1978, but they eventually, like, their numbers are just overwhelmingly large, because when you lose a member of the living to the dead, to the undead, not only do you lose that person to the living side, but that person then becomes part of the other side. It's like the White Walkers in Game of Thrones. The 2004 version of Dawn of the Dead, the remake by Zack Snyder, is somehow even more bleak than the 1978 version. I would say it is... Oh, one more thing I want to say about the 1978 version is the pregnant lady, she is able to carry a shotgun. You cannot do that in Dead Rising 2006 or 2024. Dawn of the Dead 1978 is more progressive than Dead Rising in 2024, I just want to say. Dawn of the Dead remake of 2004, I don't think it's as good as the 1978 version, but it is entertaining. So in 1978, the only two people that survive are the black centrist and the pregnant woman. They fly away on a helicopter together, because apparently he knows how to fly a plane as well. In the 2004 version, there's a pregnant woman, but she ends up getting bitten, and then her child is a zombie that gets shot. Like, that's... yeah, this movie is very bleak. And by 2004, the biggest change between like the 1978 and the 2004 version is the pace. Like the 2004 remake is much more action focused, because in 2002, with 28 Days Later, there was a new rule added to like zombie entertainment. Now the zombies were moving much faster. They weren't slow and shambling anymore like the Resident Evil 1 zombies or the 1978 Romero zombies. These fuckers could come at you from all different angles with their numbers, and also very, very quickly. Very intense. It's almost like 1978 on amphetamine. In the early 1990s, Francis Fukuyama announced the end of history, in which he states that liberal democracy kind of won with the fall of the Berlin Wall and Soviet communism. And we see this play out with the mall. The mall is a space of rampant consumerism that doesn't concern itself with the outside. You come to the mall to escape, and now the zombies are here. Are we dead? Are we alive? Or are we undead? This leads me to the death drive, which was originally a term coined by Sigmund Freud, and he wrote about it in his book Beyond the Pleasure Principle. The pleasure principle was basically about maximizing pleasure, happiness, and minimizing pain. But throughout the century, it was further developed by other theorists who I'm not going to name here. But what Freud left out was that humans actually enjoy their pain, and that pain is a necessary and a fundamental reality of the human experience, especially under conditions of late capitalism or neoliberalism or the supposed end of history. Freud defined the death drive as, I don't know, I guess sort of the antithesis to the pleasure principle, where it was just this desire to return to non-organic matter, back to lifeless death, just living your life and then dying. And this is where we see the difference between desire and drive. Desire, defined in psychoanalysis, desire is like something you walk on a leash, but desire is always walking ahead of you. It doesn't stop. You can never pick up and grab and hold and contain desire. So for example, I was looking forward to playing Dead Rising, and I thought, oh, once I get Dead Rising remastered, I'm looking forward to this. This is one of my most anticipated games of the year. And if I just get my hands on this game, it'll fill the aching hole in my consumer heart. Well, guess what? That didn't happen. Because then I had to play the game, and I had to come to the realization that life moves on. So that's desire only gets you so far. Drive, and the death drive in particular, I kind of see as like a workflow, because the transition from death to drive is desire. You're spinning the drain, trying to chase down and contain your desire. You're trying to capture your desire. Drive is when you start finding enjoyment in the failure in obtaining your desire. Like I was saying at the beginning of the video, using Dark Souls as the example of, a very frustrating game at points, but you're enjoying the frustration and the repeated failure of dying. which leads me to the perfect run in Dead Rising. The infamous, the ever elusive perfect run. So I decided, as a conclusion to this video, on Saturday, October 5th, 2024, I was going to do the perfect run in Dead Rising. 72-hour loop, and I'm going to do it in one actual real-life day. Those are my rules. My only rule was I had to do the perfect run. I had to start the game, and I had to finish it in the 24-hour span of Saturday, October 5th, 2024. The perfect run requires you to get all the scoops, all the main quest stuff, 49 survivors, and insane overtime mode in which Frank gets infected and then has an additional 24 hours in which he has to go on a wild goose chase throughout the mall and find a cure that Isabella creates. So what does Frank unraveling the scoop entail? The whole main quest revolves around two siblings, Carlito and Isabella. Carlito is initially portrayed as a terrorist. He's the first couple of main boss battles of the game. And he's got all these bombs he's planning to set off. And it comes to in the mall, but you come to find out that he is trying to take revenge against the United States because he sees the United States as this poisonous colonial imperial country that has overtaken. They don't make it explicit which country this is, but it's a country in Central America in a city called Santa Cabeza in particular. Santa Cabeza literally translates in English into Saint Head. So there was like a meat processing plant there, but also it served as this area for drug trade. But it was run and owned by U.S. imperial interests. And people don't know this. So this is the typical American ignorance story. Nobody actually knows the actual truth of what's going on. Latinos and all that are just bad, filthy terrorists. And this came out after 9/11 too, which is interesting. And when you're initially playing this game, you're like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like they have these Homeland Security people in, like Brad, who looks suspiciously like Ving Rhames, and Jesse, who are these Homeland Security agents who are sent in during the outbreak to take down this filthy Latino terrorist who is trying to murder all Americans. And I mean, that stuff, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether that's Carlito is not sympathetically portrayed in this game, but Isabella is. Isabella, the whole latter half of the main quest is just a collaboration between Frank and Isabella to try to stop Carlito and his quest to... Because the reason he's got all these bombs set up and wants to blow up the mall is so it can spread this virus that started in Central America, in Santa Cabeza, where the meat processing plant was, that had these wasps that were the cause of the infection. And the bombs have this, house this larva that will then, upon explosion, kind of spread and proliferate throughout all these pockets in the U.S. and effectively infect the entire country. That's Carlito's goal as somebody who's been scorned by U.S. business and government interests. And then in overtime mode, this U.S. Special Forces team, SWAT, basically comes in and eradicates all the zombies because they're here to completely eliminate the story. That they don't want Frank to expose this. So they're looking to mow down not just Carlito and Isabella, but also Frank and any human, just to wipe out this story. So the overtime mode becomes about you have to kill these SWAT guys now, who are much more difficult than zombies and take a ton of hits to take down. So in a day of glorious hedonism, I decided to do the perfect run.
It's about 5:00 p.m. Saturday, October 5th. And the perfect run is not going well. Floyd, the old man in the antique store, I got a phone call from Otis, the janitor, telling me that Floyd wants some wine. So I get some wine, but I waited and I did another mission. I thought, I have enough time. And I come back to the safe house and Floyd is gone. I have no idea where Floyd is. And according to my iPad that tells me the status of all the survivors, he's still alive. So he's somewhere out there trying to find a bottle of wine. And I don't know where he is. And my tooth is throbbing. and it needs to get pulled now. I'm not even going to get a root canal. I have to get it pulled. I don't think I'm going to be able to do the perfect run today. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do the perfect run. I have to go touch grass. That's what I'm going to do. Culture has made us insane. This video game has made me insane. I need to go outside and touch grass.
And I initially thought, oh, I'm glad the remaster got rid of the need to save in the bathrooms, like the old school Resident Evil. You have to save at a typewriter safe room type of deal. And that quickly came to bite me in the ass during my first attempt at the perfect run, because I was in Wonderland Plaza as the cop psychopath mission activated. And apparently if you activate the mission and you activate that quest, but you don't go to the cop and you take too long, he will start killing the survivors. So when I got to the cop initially, there was only one survivor left when there's supposed to be 4. And I also screwed myself multiple times by not making multiple save slots. Yes, I've forgotten one of the key rules of old school survival horror, and I was relying on this autosave that wasn't getting me anywhere. An essential weapon for the perfect run is the mini chainsaw, which, like I said, you get from Adam the Clown. There's 3 books you can get. I think the remaster adds 4, even though I don't think I ever got the 4th book that adds the 3 times amount of damage you deal. But there's 3 other books you get that make it so you have basically infinite uses with the mini chainsaw. I kind of equate this to the infinite rocket launcher in Resident Evil, but a melee version of that. And during my time playing Dead Rising and doing the perfect run, I had to come to a very harsh reality that I have to get a tooth extracted. This whole month I've been working on this video. I've been sick. I've had a throbbing molar that initially thought I needed a root canal, but I need to get my tooth extracted. So I'm dealing with that very real emotional, psychological, and physical pain. And I'm just counting down the days now till I get that tooth extracted because I waited too long. And this is the price I have to pay for putting off a tooth that's been giving me problems now for over 5 years. This is the death drive. The death drive in a neoliberal, in a capitalist society where you have to go as the individual and try to find a way to make it in the world. In my case, trying to be this ridiculous YouTuber, talking about video games and politics and philosophical concepts. I've put myself potentially into an early grave by refusing to take care of myself. And this is where I would say the death drive is a workflow, but it could be a stupid workflow. Like, take care of yourself. If your teeth is hurting you and you have health insurance, and I understand not everybody has health insurance, and one of the excuses I gave for so long for refusing to go to the dentist when this tooth has been giving me agony for 5 years now is because I didn't have health insurance after I quit my retail job after COVID. I'll tell you, I broke my rule. I beat the game on Tuesday, October 8th, after taking a break. But you know what? I'm glad I took a break because you know what? It allowed me to enjoy the game. I thought I hit a wall with Floyd and the wine on Saturday, joylessly playing through a perfect run. And I thought I lost it. So I said, you know what? I'm going to step away and I'm going to stop for the day. And then I returned to it on Sunday, and then everything fell into place. I thought I hit a wall with the 3 survivors in the hunting shack that start shooting you. And then they started shooting me again when I showed them I thought I showed them the picture of the duct that you need to take in order to convince them to come back to the security room with you. But I was just delirious and tired and frustrated with the game. The only way I could return to enjoying the game was to take a long break. And then the next Sunday when I broke my rule, I happened to be enjoying the game again because I realized, I actually do still have a chance to do the perfect run because Floyd was never gone. I just couldn't find him because my lazy ass didn't realize there's 3 different rooms that the survivors can be in, not 2, which I initially thought. A mall is itself kind of an undead place. Its TV feeds don't give you the ESPN or CNN or Fox News. The mall reminds you that all of those things, all those worries, even the things we love like entertainment, are on the outside. The mall gives you a very specific type of entertainment in which you must pay in order to get the entertainment. Neoliberalism or late capitalism appears to be coming to an end. although this too could just be a deep fake and we could be in for another 100 years of this. We could all be dead and capitalism could still exist in its current form with all of its grotesque contradictions. But malls still exist, though they are becoming more common as digital representations than tangible ones, thanks to the metaverse. But the mall in either reality promises an escape for the hyper-individual, who has become both producer and consumer at once for all of his time living. In the game's most unique cluster of side quests, you meet another photographer in the mall named Kent. He's appropriately douchey, constantly patronizing Frank because he's insecure that Frank might be a better photographer. He's jealous when Frank shows him some of his shots. The ruling class doesn't want competition because they hate competition. They want control, monopoly, and domination. Zombies decay, but not like a dead body decays. It doesn't blow to double its size. Zombies are undead. Is this bad? This is the condition of the United States in 2024, a contradiction of selfish values and altruistic values, of individual responsibility versus collective responsibility, of creation and consumption. The undead needs infinite nourishment in order to sustain his hunger. Many people on the left who are tired of neoliberalism are also too tired to make enough of an effort toward solidarity. Like the infamous quote from either Frederick Jameson or Mark Fisher. They both said this. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism. There's still too much judging, too much moralizing, too much the other side is corrupt and stupid. And so we wait and create in this utopian hell of endless shopping options that convince us that if we find just the one thing, it'll fill the aching hole in our hearts. But desire will only get you so far. How to enjoy the effort of failure indefinitely, that is up for every individual to decide on their own. Thanks for watching. Okay, this is the final part of the video. I was thinking about all the survival horror games I've reviewed so far, and I've come up with Resident Evil Code Veronica, Signalis, and now Dead Rising. I'm not going to count Resident Evil 4, even though I did a whole video about Ada Wong, which we'll just leave it at that. So right now we have these three games. I got this idea from Jeff Gersman, who is currently ranking all of the NES games. This is a monumental task and it will probably never be complete. But for now, we're going to do this and see what happens. So number one, I think with a bullet is easily Dead Rising, whether you want to count the 2006 version or the 2024 remaster. I think the remaster does a phenomenal job ironing out the kinks of what and the friction of what made the 2006 edition kind of impenetrable. Like I've been saying throughout this video, I'm very grateful that the remaster exists in this form, and it's an immensely replayable game, and I think it's very revolutionary with the 72-hour loop and kind of being a roguelike and all that stuff. Number two. If you were to ask me, would I rather want to play Resident Evil Code Veronica or Signalis? My heart is telling me, even though critically Signalis may be looked upon now as the better game between the two, and we still haven't gotten a Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, so maybe the jury's still out on that one. But my heart tells me right now, I would rather play Resident Evil Code Veronica. The lesbians are going to hate me for this one.